Amawan Ban Yahawada Ban Yasher Allah. Now, first I can start by saying all praise to Ever Shai, the honors to the elders and apostles that well, and salutations to the brothers that's doing the truth and sincerity. Now, this lesson basically is on Ephraim. Ephraim, the so-called Puerto Ricans, which in Hebrew it's Ahparayam. Ahparayam, meaning I am fruitful. And Puerto Rican is Port Rich. You know, they named the Puerto Ricans or Ephraim Port Rich or Puerto Rican because when the Spanish put up on the shores, it was rich with gold, man, gold nuggets. And at that time, around 1492, Ephraim was being called the Arawak Indians, which later down the line, transferred into the Tainos or the Boricua Indians, right? Slakia. I'm just gonna get into a little bit about Ephraim. This is I'm gonna start with 2nd Ezra, chapter 13, verse 39. And whereas thou sawest that he gathered another peaceable multitude unto him, those are the 10 tribes which were carried away prisoners out of their own land in the time of Hosea the king, whom Salmanasar the king of Assyria led away captive, and he carried them over the waters. Right now, that was Salmanasar the fifth that led the 10 tribes captive into the land of Assyria. But one of the tribes, which was Levi, went back, and Hosea in Hebrew is Hawashai, which means deliverer. So during his time, the 10 tribes were captured, and that was around 720 BC. But Salmanasar didn't put the whole, clamp on him. His son Sargon II did. So I can hold on, because I have the history. All right, this is Assyrian captivity is the period in the history of ancient Israel and Judah during which several thousand Israelites of ancient Samaria were resettled as captives by Assyria. The northern kingdom of Israel was conquered by the Neo-Assyrian monarchs Tiglath-Pileser III, or Pul, and Salmanasar V. The later Assyrian rulers, Sargon II and his son and successors, Sennacherib, were responsible for finishing the 20-year demise of Israel's northern 10-tribe kingdom. Although they did not overtake the southern kingdom, Jerusalem was besieged but not taken. The tribes forcibly resettled by Assyria later became known as the 10 lost tribes. Let me see. It says in 722 BC, nearly 10 to 20 years after the initial deportations, the ruling city of the northern kingdom of Israel, Samaria, was finally taken by Sargon II after a 3-year siege started by Salmanasar V. That's the point I was looking for. And you can find that history in 2 Kings, man. 2 Kings chapter 17, just read the whole chapter. Right. So that's how Ephraim got to Assyria. Now from Assyria over here to the Americas, this is back in 2nd Ezra chapter 13, verse 40. These are the 10 tribes which were carried away prisoners out of their own land in the time of Hosea the king, whom Salmanasar the king of Assyria led away captive. See, the scriptures lining up with history, man, or history lining up with the scriptures. And he carried them over the waters, and so came they into another land. But they took this counsel among themselves, and they would leave the multitude of the heathen and go forth into a further country. where never mankind dwelt, and that was the Americas, that they might keep their statues which they never kept in their own land, and they enter into Euphrates by the narrow passage of the river. For the Most High then shewed signs for them and held still the flood till they were passed over. Right, and they went through the what is it called? The Horn of Africa. Salakia. Right, they went through the Horn of Africa. Let me see if I can bring it up on this Wikipedia. You see it? Right there where Ethiopia and Somalia is. That's the Horn of Africa. That's the way they took. Let me see. Right. Yeah, I'll go into detail a little later on it. But for the sake of time, let me finish what was right. All right, it says where never mankind dwelt, that they might there keep their statues, which they never kept in their own land, right? Because they was worshiping idols, and they came to America to keep their statutes, the laws and stuff. And they enter into the Euphrates by the narrow passage of the river, for the Most High shewed signs for them and held still the flood till they were passed over. For through that country there was a great way to go, namely of a year and a half. So it took a year and a half for them to get to America, and the same region is called Asareth, which is earth. Then dwelt they there until the later time, and now when they shall begin to come. Then they dwelt there until the later time, and we living in a later time right now today, man. So that's how Ephraim ultimately got to America from over there, in the Middle East, man. Slakia. All right. So I'm gonna go from there and get into a little bit of history on Ephraim. Let me see. All right. This is let me see. Nope, I think I want this one. All right, it says Puerto Rico. Go back to the title. Puerto Rico it says Spanish for Port Rich. See, that's where you get the Puerto Rican from. English, Spanish, locally also, officially the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, so on and so forth. It says Free Associated State of Puerto Rico, and briefly called Puerto Rico, is an unincorporated territory of the United States located in the northeastern Caribbean Sea. And We're gonna get a little bit into it. It says, originally populated by the indigenous Taino people, the island was claimed in 1493 by Christopher Columbus for the Kingdom of Castile. Right, you see, so the Tainos do it. See that's where the name Taino came from. I'm sorry. It says, and it later endured invasion attempts from the French, Dutch, and British. 4 centuries of Spanish colonial government transformed the island's ethnic, cultural, and physical landscapes primarily with waves of African captives and Canarian and Andalusian settlers. Right. So as you can see, all them Edomite groups came over to colonize Ephraim's land, man. But that was prophecy. That's the curses. I'm gonna start here at Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 48. Hold on. All right, 48. It says, "Therefore shalt thou serve thine enemies." Hold on, wait. I'm gonna start at verse 15. Deuteronomy 20:15. But it shall come to pass, if thou wilt not hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy power, to observe to do all his commandments and his statutes, which I command thee this day, right? Because that's why they went into captivity from the beginning, that all these curses shall come upon thee and overtake thee. Right, so the curses came upon us, man. Upon Ephraim. And I'm gonna jump. It says, verse 45, moreover, all these curses shall come upon thee and shall pursue thee and overtake thee till thou be destroyed, because thou hearkenest not unto the voice of the Lord thy power to keep his commandments and his statutes which he commanded thee. And they shall be upon thee for a sign and for a wonder, and upon thy seed forever, because thou servest not the Lord thy power with joyfulness and with gladness of heart for the abundance of all things. Right, because when we was in the land of Israel, the Lord gave us everything, man. Then Israel started to sin, started worship idols and stuff. So that's why Israel started to go into captivity. That's when the Lord sent the nations upon them. Therefore shalt thou serve thine enemies, which the Lord thy power send against thee, in hunger and in thirst and in nakedness and in want of all things. Right, that's slavery, man. And he shall put a yoke of iron upon thy neck until he have destroyed thee. That's Judah with the yoke. The Lord shall bring a nation up against thee from far, from the end of the earth, as swift as the eagle flieth. A nation whose tongue thou shalt not understand. Right, and those them conquistador Spaniards that came up against Ephraim, man. A nation of fierce countenance, which shall not regard the person of the old, nor shew favor to the young. Right, they came there. They watched Ephraim. Ephraim gave them all sorts of help, and then they took Ephraim down, man. It says, right, so yeah, that was a curse for them, for Columbus to come over there and conquer them. Then afterwards, as you can see, the French and Dutch and British did invasion attempts also, man. Okay, now it says, in the Spanish imperial imagination, Puerto Rico played a secondary but strategic role when compared to wealthier colonies like Peru and Mexico. I'm gonna jump. It says, Puerto Ricans are natural born citizens of the United States. Puerto Rico does not have a vote in the United States Congress, which governs the territory with full jurisdiction under the Puerto Rican Federal Relations Act of 1950. That's why they called it an unincorporated territory. That's what they meant by unincorporated territory. So they can't what did it say? It said Puerto Rico does not have a vote in the United States Congress. That's what that meant, which governs the territory with full jurisdiction of the Puerto Rican Federal Relations Act of the 1950s. Right, the Puerto Ricans can't vote for no presidents or no vice presidents over here in America. Over there in Puerto Rico, the the U.S. citizens are the ones who vote for officials. It said the Puerto Rican Federation Relations Act of 1950 was an act of Congress of the 81st United States Congress signed by President Harry Truman on July 3, 1950. The act was enacted in order to enable the people of Puerto Rico to organize a local government pursuant to a constitution of their own, comparable to those of other territories and states of the United States. From its enactment until this day, the act has served as an organic law for the government of Puerto Rico and its relations with the United States as a whole. All right. Now, let me see. All right. Here's the next point. It says when Columbus arrived in Puerto Rico during his second voyage on November 19, 1493, the island was inhabited by the Taino. They called Borican or Boricuan, I'm guessing, in Spanish transliteration. Alliteration. Columbus named the island Saint Jean Baptistas in honor of Saint John the Baptist. Having reported the findings of his first travel, Columbus brought with him this time a letter from King Ferdinand, empowered by a papal bull that authorized any course of action necessary for the expansion of the Spanish Empire, right? That's that nation that came from far, and the Christian faith. Jean Ponce de Leon, a lieutenant under Columbus, founded the first Spanish settlement, Cupara, on August 8, 1508. He later served as the first governor of the island. Eventually, traders and other maritime visitors came to refer to the entire island as Puerto Rico, and St. John became the first name of the main trading shipping port. It says at the beginning of the 16th century, the Spanish people began to colonize the island. Despite the laws of Burgos of 1512 and other decrees for the protection of the indigenous populations, the Taino Indians were forced into an encomienda system of forced labor in the early years of colonization. The population suffered extremely high fatalities from epidemics of European infectious diseases, right? So, these colonists, these Edomite devils, was putting Ephraim into slavery and killing them off with diseases, man. And that was all part of prophecy, man. I'm going to start with this scripture. This is Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 37. And thou shalt become an astonishment, a proverb, and a byword. That's where you get the name Puerto Rico from. Among all nations, whither the Lord shall lead thee. Right, so Ephraim lost his name because of the curse that the Lord put on him. It was changed to from Taino to Arawak, Boricua to Puerto Rico or Port Rich, man. Because those are not Ephraim's names, man. And then there was another scripture I wanted. Oh yeah, no, that was it. All right, this is the next point. It says in 1520, King Charles I of Spain issued a royal decree collectively emancipating the remaining Taino population. By that time, the Taino people were few in number, right? Enslaved Africans had already begun to compensate for the native labor laws, right? That's when they brought Judah over there, man. But later numbers were proportionate to the diminished commercial interests. Spain soon began to demonstrate for the island colony. Other nearby islands like Cuba, St. Dominic, and Guadalupe attracted more of the slave trade than Puerto Rico, right? And those the rest of the brothers, man. Probably because of greater agricultural interest in those islands on which colonists had developed large sugar plantations and had the capital to invest in the Atlantic slave trade. All right. Well, that's the end of those points. So Ephraim was took um from you know well left from Samaria, got took to Assyria. From Assyria, they came to America, Slakia, and then went back into slavery. I don't think this was the article. That's Satan. It says, welcome to Puerto Rico. This is the next one, Puerto Rico's history. It says, Taino Indians who inhabit the territory called the island Boricuan or Boricuan, which means the great land of the valiant and noble lord, or land of the great lords, right? So as you can see, that's a proverb in the Bible, man. That Boricua, Ephraim be calling themselves Boricua Indians or Taino Indians. And, with them titles being on them, they look down on each other, man. But they're originally the same people. Ephraim, according to the scriptures. It says, today this word, and you know what? Let me get that. Slack